morning, all. If you're hearing this live for the first time, it's the 4th of July. I would say happy 4th, but this is just not the holiday celebrating show. Or certain holidays, right? If you go back in the archives, I think it's show number 27. And this is episode 151. Did a special Mother's Day show that, wasn't trying to be... I just was speaking from the heart, and it actually helped the shelter that I was at have a Mother's Day party for the women there. That was actually kind of one of the happier times from that place. So there's certain holidays we care about, but the 4th of July is probably not going to be one that we're going to tout. Someone had noticed during Black History Month that we didn't have any black people on the show, and that on Asian History Month we didn't have any Asian people on. Is that on purpose? Kinda, not really. Like, sometimes it crosses my mind, but more often than not, that's just too much thought to put into something even that trivial. But on this 4th of July, we will be playing the Peru episode. Shout out to C. Derek Varn, who does Theorizing with a Hammer on Zero Books, it still feels weird saying. It still feels weird saying that we are part of the Zero Books family, but we are. A lot of these shows go on Zero. We have a series that we do on Zero called The Dispatch. It's a video essay series that Pascal and I do. Sometimes he provides the content, and I make the visuals and narrate. So it's been a lot of fun. But Derek is on Zero Books with Theorizing with a Hammer. He does Pop the Left with Doug Lane, and he's got his own show that I got to do the music and visuals for, Varn Vlog. And through Derek Varn, we met our guest for this show, Camilo Gomez. He is a journalist out of Lima, Peru. And he covers the Americas, Central and South, mostly South America. And he hit me up and asked if we wanted to do a show about the election. And I was like, sure, but all this stuff needs context. You can't just start a show and say, hey, there's an election in Peru, and there's a self-proclaimed socialist that won, and it's victory dance time. There tends to be context, there tends to be complications, and we can't view everything through an American lens. We have to have, or start to try to have, some sort of understanding of the politics of the region where these things happen. So when we were covering the protests in Colombia, we literally had people that were living in Colombia. And on this, we're getting it straight from Lima. And in doing the videos, that you guys hear the videos, so of course you hear the narration, but you don't get to see it. And I have to go down a bit of, I shouldn't say have to, I enjoy finding really old archival footage, and I'm shocked at how old the footage is. And then since we've been doing these shows, Colombia has a quote unquote leftist regime with FARC, Their legacy is a lot more complicated than the Shining Path out of Peru. There's actually like several communist organizations out of Peru, leftist groups, and the Shining Path has a very violent history in Peru. Their leader takes the word megalomaniac to another level. And he definitely believes in that if you're not with me, you're against me mindset to a deadly degree. And, some of that plays into the election as well. It's good to have an understanding of that because you have to understand all the parties involved. And in the U.S., we see things through a Republican-Democrat lens. And there's Democrats that lean a certain way, and there's Republicans that are further right than others. But especially in the Americas, there's numerous parties in a country. There could be numerous Marxist parties like Peru. So we went and had a deep dive into the election of Pedro Castillo, Keiko Fujimori and the Fujimori legacy. Also the legacy of Juan Velasco, their president in the late 60s, who was a bit of a military dictator, but who kind of gave in to certain leftist demands. It's a good show. I really had fun. I'm so glad that Camilo reached out. He will be coming back as we will follow these elections because Peru has a history of electing socialists that have made hard right turns or neoliberal turns. So on that note, enjoy. And I am out. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Foreign Policy Thursdays. And I will say this before I even start the show. First of all, thank you for everyone that's a patron that participated in the Ask Pascal. We had our first ever Ask Pascal. I also had my first ever phone call with a higher tier patron. We do have a thing for higher tier patrons. If you would like, you can have a one-on-one call with us. Actually, was a pretty nice phone call. We went for a little over an hour. I know Pascal went for about an hour on the Ask Pascal segment. I saw a little bit of it. And also we have not planned out, like, we plan out the shows a few weeks in advance, but we don't plan out to be like, okay, the theme of this month is going to be Latin America. But for some reason, the theme of this month has been Latin America, and I'm learning a lot, as I hope a lot of you guys are too. And today we're going to be talking about Peru. So I'm pretty excited about this because I was up till the wee hours of the morning making the video that you're going to see later. But let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog, my partner in all of this madness, the man with the questions, Pascal Rico.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings, Jason Mile. Peace and greetings to the audience.
And another scholarly fellow. Again, I can't do this alone. I have to call on my extremely intelligent friends that have multiple degrees in this stuff so we can get a better understanding. You know him as your favorite member of the deep state. We know him as our favorite Polish friend, Kuba, deep state Kuba.
Gentlemen, pleasure as always.
I like it. You're just Kuba.
That's all I need.
That's all you need. We don't need the whole government name. And before we bring in our guests, he hit me up and he was like, "Hey man, I was on Varn's show and we talked about Peru and maybe you want to talk about these elections in Peru." And I was like, "Yeah, these very interesting. You see the leftist social media podcast sphere doing backflips over the fact that there is a socialist that just won the presidency in Peru. And as I do some more research on this, that's not the first time that a socialist has won the presidency in Peru and has actually made a hard right turn. I'm not saying that Castillo will. It just has happened before. So we always want to give some historical context to these situations. They never happen in a vacuum. So here is the video for our show today.
I hope with my heart that the vote will be meaningful because we're living in very tough times. I hope we're one who understands the situation and governs with his heart.
I want zero corruption, better healthcare, education, and jobs.
The hacienda is run like a baronial fief. The laws of the state are not applied in the latifundium without the tacit or formal consent of large landowners. The authority of political or administrative officials is in fact subject to the authority of the landowner in his domain. The latter considers his latifundium to be outside the jurisdiction of the state, and he disregards completely the civil rights of the people who live within his property. He collects excise taxes, grants monopolies, and imposes sanctions restricting the liberty of the laborers and their families. That's a quote from Jose Carlos Mariategui. Peru's long struggle for democracy continues with their current presidential election. A nation that has overcome a series of corrupt leaders, military coups, and a deadly civil war within the last 30 years. Will the election of Pedro Castillo, a former elementary school teacher and socialist, over the daughter of former Peruvian dictator Alberto Fujimori, be Peru's moment to break free of their Western economic shackles? Will the far-right Keiko Fujimori be able to overturn the election using the Trump playbook, citing baseless claims of electoral fraud? With military support, will Fujimori be able to call for something that is all too common in Peru, a military coup? We'll discuss this and more. This is Revolution.
We lost your sound, G.
Because everybody fucking bitches and moans about the echo. Just fucking enjoy the slapback, goddammit. I play music in a rock band. Of course I have echo everywhere. It covers up the fact that I play sloppy slows. So he is a freelance journalist and podcast host from Peru. Please welcome Camilo Gomez. thank you for joining us, coming all the way live from Peru. Are you in Lima?
Yes, I am in Lima.
Well, thank you very much for reaching out. Thank you for joining us. Where do we begin, fellas, when it comes to the Peruvian question? I am a little nervous about a possible military coup. It's not like it hasn't happened there before several times. What would stop it from happening this time?
I think it is very curious because something that hasn't been that much tell. It is the fact that Castillo has support, and it could sound strange because people relate the military with the right generally in Latin America, and that's true. Although the base of the military, particularly the veterans, even days before the election, where some veteran associations were saying that they were going to support Castillo. So kind of the troops, not the leadership, which is quite right wing. And we have seen several attempts to don't recognize the election. So the election isn't being recognized by Keiko Fujimori, which is the candidate against whom Castillo ran, and by most of the right. And she has been trying to make claims that there has been fraud, despite that none of the international organizations have been able to put any proof that there was any kind of systematic fraud going on. And the Peru Libre party, which is the party of Pedro Castillo, is a very new and a small party that doesn't really have that much power, obviously, much less to do fraud in an election that has international observers in most of the regions. There was an important coverage of the press, and Pedro Castillo being from Cajamarca, so the press was covering even like rural parts of Peru. So it's not there are not in any kind of guide that there has been any fraud. Neither the electoral authorities or the international organizations have found any kind of proof of fraud. Despite that, the right has some even openly there has been a military letter signed by many, including the former dictator Francisco Morales Bermudez, calling for respect to democracy in quotes. It's literally a joke, basically, what is going on.
I wanted to ask a question, if you can, Camilo. Can you talk about the role that coronavirus has had in the election? Do you think that the coronavirus crisis, which from what I understand has been rather extreme in Peru, was the kind of the match that lit the fire that put the Fujimori administration at bay? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think it's true. So Peru is a country that, with the neoliberal reforms of the 90s, had it's true that it had macroeconomic growth, and to some degree it has become reflected into kind of becoming a much more neoliberal society, like a lot of malls that have become kind of the symbol, particularly in the urban areas. But the reality was that a lot of the public service were kind of deteriorating, and among them, particularly the health sector, not only because of the for a lot of factors, but among them the issue that the existence of a private sector in health made, at least for elements of the middle and upper classes, not a necessity trying to rely on the public health sector, which, I mean, someone could go to try to have an appointment for a doctor, and the appointment is going to be next year, and it's not something strange. It's something very common, and obviously the issue is that Peru, having a very informal economy, that discontent, particularly among the lower middle class, among the working class, it was difficult to see manifested. And within the context of the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, and the kind of terrorist violence, like obviously any kind of leftist movement was kind of accused of being more or less sympathetic to terrorism, even if many were actually quite opposed. And the interesting thing about this is that the COVID-19 pandemic was praised, like its international coverage startly was the Economist wrote an article about the early lockdowns in Peru, quite positive, and it was kind of strange. The issue is, it's true, Peru had a very small healthcare infrastructure to begin with, but the issue was that the many people in Lima come from the interior of the country, and many are people that are not even thinking about staying in Lima forever, just are get a job and then move back, which is a dynamic that exists in many other places. But the issue is that with the lockdown, they couldn't get a bus to go home, so they had to walk long distance, and many times being robbed. Even there have some cases of people that were assassinated. So it was really terrible, and sadly it was kind of also a way that the pandemic spread basically for all over Peru, because it's true that Peru has a relatively important touristic industry, but it's fairly concentrated in some areas. It's for different reasons. It's not that there are much more places beyond Machu Picchu or other places in the Andean or in the coast. There are cities like Trujillo or Chiclayo or Piura that are also well known. In the Andes there is Arequipa, or in the Amazon there is Iquitos. But the issue is that those are the cities that kind of have some much more developed touristic infrastructure. Other cities may have some really interesting attractives, but they are complicated. They haven't been able to develop that much of a touristic infrastructure. So it wasn't think that the pandemic was going to go everywhere, but it went. And Peru has had more than 119,000 deaths. So almost around 0.7% of the population have died. And it has the largest death per capita of COVID-19 in the entire world. So it's really a tragic story. The Peruvian economy is fairly informal, so around 70% of the population, even before the pandemic, were in informal jobs, and around now, it's some people argue that it's probably around 80% of the population. So probably at this point, Peru is the most informal economy in the world, which it shows why a lot of people weren't that invested in the system in trying to preserve it.
Fascinating. Do you think that the COVID situation had a significant effect in terms of the outcome of the election? Do you think that was part of the reason why the left-leaning candidate might have won?
Yes, I think that a lot of the candidates were known to some degree within the Peruvian politics. Some have been congressmen, and Hernando Soto has been for a while, around Peruvian politics, and all were to some degree linked to some kind of a structural a structural relationship to the system. There was a candidate, Rafael Lopez Aliaga, who has been described as the Peruvian Bolsonaro. I think he tried to be an outsider, but the issue is that he was competing for the votes of Keiko, and Keiko had a much developed infrastructure. So in the end, she was able to put the edge. But actually, like what people may be surprised is that Pedro Castillo won the first round. But the issue is you have to win by more than 50% in order to win. So it was to go to another round, and in that he won much more squarely. But he anyway like won. I when the conversation I had with the Syriac Bar, I was talking like if Castillo was going to win, but I really didn't think if a country was really dying that people were going to choose to go back to the past with Fujimori. I think that people were really I really felt that people were really sick about a system which has shown a complete lack of capacity. Like there were people that had insurance, actually private insurance, and their insurance didn't want to cover COVID treatment. So
Wow.
that's the problem with the system, the private healthcare system. And I mean, this is a curious argument. The National Bureau of Economic Research, which by no means is a left-wing publication, it's a normie economic journal, published an article a while ago about how neoliberal reforms have affected like the healthcare sectors in throughout Latin America, not just in Peru, but also it mentioned Peru. And I think it is a very tragic situation. There is a lack of professionals in many fields in medicine. The kind of neoliberal reform also of education has made that a lot of the careers that became kind of more common in the private universities, and some of them private for-profit universities, were kind of business administration and accounting and things like that. Even law, which in Peru is kind of an undergraduate degree. So not necessarily the what happens in other countries where their education sectors expand, since it has been a much more market-driven, growth. It has been much more focused on careers that are considered to be profitable and to some degree easier, in the sense that obviously if you want to study medicine, you need to know biology, chemistry, things that could be complicated. I think the issue, I think it has been that there was what last year has been considered a coup, a parliamentary coup. So the president that was elected in 2016 was Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. So Pedro Pablo Kuczynski is a neoliberal, more or less, economist. He is Peruvian, but his family is from overseas.
I apologize.
no, and that has made that he has a lot of connections overseas, and he actually studied in Oxford. He did his undergraduate, I think, in philosophy, politics, and economics, which is, I think, for a lot of future politicians, quite common undergraduate. And then he did an MBA in Princeton and worked in Coca-Cola, I think, and in the several corporations. He has been in many in many places of importance throughout his life, and he has been Minister of Finance for many years in Peru in different governments. He's, I think, a fairly technocratic politician, obviously fluent in English and well connected to kind of more cosmopolitan in some way that Keiko would actually in the second round he ran against Keiko, and Keiko was at that point a little bit more populist and she had a kind of more of popular base support. I think there is some element to Keiko and the kind of popular capitalism, because in urban areas, particularly in the coast, there has been some economic growth. And as I mentioned, malls have become a very important symbol of kind of this growth. And I think it is. She kind of had, developed some kind of rhetoric of popular capitalism, and in that way she had some support, working class support. But PPK was seen as so much more integrally close to the elite, and obviously the anti-Fujimorismo, which is I think a political movement that goes from different ideologies, like from left to right. Although the right it's very small, but it has some elements which are quite curious, that have always hated Keiko, and was able to win, but Keiko didn't recognize the results and was always trying to create mayhem in the PPK government, and they were able to remove him from office. Because they had the majority in parliament, and they did the same in the context of the pandemic in November of last year, and it was actually like only the coup only was able to back down because it was massive protests, which sadly led to protesters dead and many more injured, some very seriously, and it was a tragedy. And I think something about that is really interesting to understand the kind of situation. Some argue that the police has been fairly on the side of the coup, and there is some elements that indicate something to that effect, to some degree. That there were elements of the police. So it's also true that some people, like knowing that there was going to be repression, like actually like they took vacations and things like that, and it was curious, like that developments. But what it should be said, is that the military was much less convinced. And I think some arguments that were about the military kind of ambiguity toward that coup was the fact that the military is not completely sure about the control of the troops. So if they took a very kind of a strong stand, they may have to face an internal rebellion. I think the police, it's diverse also. Like the police is much more urban. The military sometimes have people much more rural, in places where kind of the only thing to move from there is basically join the military. Not that it's only Peruvian story, but it is fairly particular. And what makes particularly that is that. In rural places, obviously, many people have an indigenous identity, which kind of complicated the relationships, because many times, like the leadership of the military is white. Well, in the police is much less racial difference, because like police are within cities generally, and that is much more kind of more. There is kind of more control of that. So I think that there are these elements which I think also help us to understand what then was developing. So when Manuel Merino took office, who was a congressman from the Popular Action, was a center-right party, but I think he and many are much more far-right figures, and I think the party has become much more far-right within the last year particularly. And it was very curious because obviously he was in office basically one week. So when he had to back down, basically the Congress had to elect a president within within the members of Congress. So the congressman who was elected was the Francisco Sagasti, who is the current president. He is an engineer who has a graduate degree in operations research, has been an academic and has worked for the World Bank. He's well-connected also, kind of more. He's, I guess, a liberal in the American sense to some degree, although much idiosyncratic to the Peruvian context. I think he did a really important effort because Peru hadn't been able to buy any vaccines, and he actually led a very important effort to buy vaccines. But the vaccination process was murky in the sense that there was discovered that the prior government had been able to get vaccines and sign some deals with Sinopharm, which is the Chinese vaccine, and that generated a lot of controversy. The curious thing is that Peru was among the countries that had a lot of skepticism toward vaccines, but it seems that the fact that a lot of functionaries wanted to vaccinate it, like people started to think, oh no, if these people want to be vaccinated, it's because this thing works. So the perception toward vaccines started to become much more positive, which was a kind of a strange development, but it happened. And within that context, which has been a very complex context, also, like as I mentioned, Peru has a very informal economy. So in December was basically a central moment for informal commerce, because basically, like, a tradition within Christmas in a country that is majority Christian, either Catholic or evangelical, is to buy presents for particularly kids, but for relatives and friends. So in December, one did so in the streets really a massive amount of people. Even if most were wearing masks, it was obviously, like, in the streets it's difficult to maintain social distance where there are literally, on some places, thousands of people, like, trying to buy presents. And the amount of cases started like spiraling very up. So I think that Francisco Sagasti and his party, the Purple Party, which is a liberal centrist party, was very weakened because of that. Despite that, I think maybe in another context they could have been able to do better. So it was very unclear, the political panorama. Obviously, Keiko Fujimori has been a candidate for many years. 2 times she has been in a runoff. So, but not everyone was very convinced about her, and it was kind of, people were not sure what she was going to do, and I think that that led to other candidates to appear. So there was a candidate for a while was kind of growing in support, which was someone who was a congressman for a lot of years, was Johnny Lescano, who despite that Popular Action is a right-wing party, even if maybe not the most extreme, he had a very populist, almost message that kind of resonated initially in the campaign. Then there was the Rafael Lopez Aliaga, who was called the Peruvian Bolsonaro, which a much more far-right explicit message. Then there was Veronica Mendoza, who some thought that could grow. She's a much more conventional progressive in the sense that she supports abortion, gay marriage, trans rights, so things like that. And there was Hernando de Soto, who was libertarian technically, but one of its advisors, Jorge Paredes Terry, someone linked to Movadef, who is an organization that calls for the release of the members of the Shining Path from prison. So it was a really strange campaign, the one that he led, and for moments he tried to go to the right of the Peruvian Bolsonaro. So it was kind of right, strange what he was trying to do, and they were kind of the ones that were kind of up in the polls, and Castillo, nobody gave anything about him. So the background in Castillo is an elementary teacher who and a peasant in Cajamarca, in a region in the rural Andes, which has been able to grow in the polls, basically because he was considered an outsider. He was known because he led a protest in 2017, was very massive, and the teachers' protest, which is interesting in the sense that the teachers' union, the large teachers' union, is actually led by the Communist Party, by one of the Communist Party, because there are several. But so he rose against the leadership of who he saw as kind of claudicated and kind of reformist, and so he had a very radical message, but at the same time, like he kind of seemed pragmatic, and in some sense, even some people in the right seemed supportive of his protest, which was kind of strange. Something that should be mentioned is that he was a member of Peru Possible, which is a party, a centrist party that with the time moved to the right, but he also tried to inscribe his own party, and actually, like, he was able to do so. And just last year, he joined Peru Libre, who is his current party. And it was curious because the campaign has shown that he and Peru Libre has a lot of disagreements, and it's going to be complex what is going to happen. But basically, he was seen as much as someone who has a lot in common with the kind of common person in the streets of Peru, and he was someone that's more relatable. And he did a kind of door-to-door campaign in some way. He basically went walking around Peru, which was something that led to him growing in the polls and kind of even the surprise of victory first in the first round and then in the second round. And I think here is where we are.
Camilo, you mentioned that a big part of this election was based on rejection of the system. A great deal of Peruvians are in the informal economy. They don't benefit from the system. They see elites taking advantage of it, of a lot of self-dealing through neoliberalism, the decay of things like public education, public health, and this represented a rejection of the system that brought everything to the point that we're at. To what extent does that cleavage of outsider voters that like Castillo because he's relatable, because he's not part of this cosmopolitan elite or part of the Fujimori machine, how does that map onto the other big divides and cleavages in Peru, urban versus rural, Creole versus Incan or ethnic, as well as the class difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, there are a lot of political scientists who have written about how parties in Europe now represent a much more wealthy, kind of upper middle class, well-educated. But Castillo seems stronger in the rural areas among indigenous and mestizos that are poor or maybe lower middle class, but it was kind of the opposite. So it was really a true working class campaign in a way that it doesn't seem like a campaign that they had many funds, didn't have many coordinations. It was kind of chaotic for moments. I think that as you mentioned, kind of the divide has been a very urban in the sense of the coast. I think the coast has always been much more in some way integrated to the not, I will not say global economy, because obviously Andean in the Andes there is, in the more Andean parts, in the more highlands, there are a lot of mines which are more central than what happens in a banking in Lima. But the issue is that I think there are much more, in some ways, kind of had a certain much more optimism toward what could happen in large cities like Lima and the cities in the north like Trujillo, Chiclayo, Piura, and maybe even a city in the south like Ica. So in those
basically
cities
where they build shopping malls, there's more optimism about what neoliberalism can do for you.
Yeah, I mean it's true. I mean, it could sound very strange, but the issue is that basically, like, authorities have been very unable to create any kind of public space, and there is a lot of high rates of crime, which is also a topic that I think benefited Castillo in some way, because he was a rondero, which is kind of this kind of rural vigilantes, which I think we will talk maybe a little later. So malls are seen as a place of people to meet, which is relatively safe. And for that, in particular in urban areas, I think has played a lot of an important role. But as I was saying, like this narrative of kind of popular capitalism that Keiko tried to do, it was much more difficult in areas of the Andes, and particularly in Puno. Like for those maybe who are not that familiar with anthropology or archaeology, like Puno has a lot of presence of the Aymara, and the Aymara had been central to Tiahuanaco. Tiahuanaco has been considered kind of a very commercial civilization, where a lot of trade networks that were central to the expansion of Tiahuanaco. So it was not necessarily like the idea that civilizations expand via war, but rather via trade. And in some ways, they had already a narrative like that was different than the popular capitalism, but it was kind of their own. A lot of people link the counterfeiting with Puno, because Puno is very close to Bolivia, and from Bolivia it comes a lot of counterfeiting that thrives in, as I mentioned, there are malls, but also there are kind of this more clandestine markets, which basically sell the same things, but also other things like like DVDs were fairly popular, because for a long time, like with the economic crisis in the 80s, like basically almost all cinemas died, and at one point, like it was basically the only way to get any kind of watch any kind of movie was with a VHS, and then now with the DVDs and things like that. So yeah, it is kind of this. I think this ties to the question someone was making in the comments about Castillo's embrace for neoliberalism, and I think I noticed in a comment that Castillo for moments sounded more libertarian than Hernando de Soto. It could sound weird, but he talked about kind of cutting a lot of government institutions and regulations. He also talked about the individual savings account, which I think it's a policy supported by the Cato Institute of all places. I don't know who suggested that to him. And when he was asked, like by the press, like what's the thing he's more proud about, he mentioned that the fact that some of his students, and he being an elementary teacher, has had a lot of students, obviously, that some of his students are now successful business people, and that is something quite remarkable that one will hear. So Cajamarca is a region that has a very known for its kind of commercial activities and a kind of its trades. It is a region that kind of started the internal immigration. So my family on my first side is from Amazonas, which is next to it, and for example, many people from born in Amazonas, their families were from Cajamarca. So there are kind of this, and in other parts and basically every part of Peru, that there is kind of the people from Cajamarca, and they have a very kind of characteristic that is very, and it has been very central. And actually, of all places, the Financial Times noticed it, making an article which was called "The Hat and the Pencil." So the hat is fairly common in Cajamarca, and it's kind of a symbol, and also it is an interesting issue because the French historian Nathan Bactel has related Cajamarca with a kind of crypto-Jewish memory, particularly the northern city of Selendín. And while it's true not everyone in Cajamarca is a crypto Jew, a lot of traditions and customs, including the Shiva as a funerary ritual, are kind of very defined, quite extensive there. So and it's quite curious because that generates kind of some ethnic ambiguity, and in that ethnic ambiguity, Castillo defined himself as a paisano. So paisano is a term to try to give certain familiarity. Sometimes it's used directly to say, I'm from this town, I'm from the same town. But also is used to say basically that you are from the interior. So that generates a sense of kind of connection. So I saw the question that why if Castillo
I wanted to pick up on that question. I had something that I wanted to ask, which I think dovetails very well with the super chat. Because of its history, the Peru has had both a developmental challenge as well as a kind of distribution and equality challenge, if you will. And does the libertarianism or the kind of market, especially local, small scale kind of Peruvian paisanos doing things for themselves, which sounds like what Castillo was. That's the form of capitalism, or that's the form of commercialism that he seems to be, that he seems sympathetic towards. Is that a response to the developmental challenge and to creating conditions that would allow for more economic growth and more sophisticated industry, more production, which is a problem that goes all the way back to Mariategui, that he identified, the low productivity of the haciendas, the exploitation without growth, as opposed to international capitalism, the big business, which is seen as a developmental dead end. I don't mean to characterize Castillo, but I'm asking, is that something that might account for the different attitude towards big business as opposed to smaller level commercial activity?
Yeah, I think that with Castillo is very curious because the platform that he was kind of talking was the platform of his party, Peru Libre, but it seemed he always seemed much more heterodox. Like people in Cajamarca are quite heterodox and have been considered fairly heterodox within the left. Edmundo Murrugarra, who is an anthropologist that at one point was a senator, he was fairly heterodox in the senator from the United Left in the 80s, but someone who for moments sounded like basically a libertarian, like and even more radical in some ways, like because there is this sense of like if the only thing I could do in order to live because the state don't provide anything is trading, like let's not stop anything in that process,
especially in the informal economy.
Yes. So, but the issue also it was that the peasant economy was kind of the complexity there, and with the agrarian reform there was some hope that it will go in the way of Yugoslavia, in the sense of kind of creating a market socialism. But it kind of failed because a lot of kind of there was not kind of the capacity that Yugoslavia had in many ways. The only, I think, cooperative that still survives to this day from the time of the agrarian revolution was curiously in Cajamarca. So it's called the Atahualpa Jerusalem Cooperative. As I mentioned, the Cajamarca is very known for its kind of the crypto-Jewish memory and this kind of reference that are very curious abound there. So yeah, it's curious because it seems as an example, but it works quite well, but sadly in many other parts it maybe doesn't. But Castillo was a beneficiary of the agrarian revolution, so it kind of ended the rule of the more basically kind of the transformation of the hacienda system in almost feudal republican era, and with that I think that it certainly kind of led to some degree of rethinking also about the kind of identities and kind of which I think it is quite complex, as Eric Warren has pointed out. It is something that doesn't necessarily correlate with the U.S. or even other countries in Latin America. And Edmundo Murrugarra was this former senator, was from Cajamarca. He was saying something that was very interesting, and he was saying that for him it was very difficult to identify as indigenous because his mother tongue was not Quechua, and despite that his family didn't spoke Quechua, he had gone to university. So it was strange, but in a sense, there was an idea that education and kind of going out was going to do someone to stop being indigenous. And I think in that sense, the movement that, or not the movement, but maybe the character that did capitalize on reclaiming their indigenous identity was Hugo Blanco, who is the famous Trotsky's peasant rebel, who is fairly popular in Peru, although now these days he sounds much more close to anarchism. But he had a very strong identity as indigenous, and his mother tongue was Quechua. So in that sense, he was much more connected to other peasants like him, and he was able to kind of build a kind of support that was wider than maybe other more heterodox leftists, but that were not sure about how to deal with ethnic identities.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you also is that what are the perceived kind of positions the United States has relative to this election? I know that the United States has agreed that Castillo won fair and square, but do you perceive of, if he does take power, potential problems in the face of the way in which the United States has been reacting to what has been called the pink tide administrations of South America and Latin America, that they might put certain types of obstacles to his effective political governance if he were to take power?
Yeah, I think it is curious. It's true the U.S. Department of State has issued a statement saying the elections in Peru were clean. And that I kind of give a much more respectability, and I think that with that the claims of the coup become of the fraud become much less strong. I think Gregory Meeks, who is in the American Congress, has also made a statement. I think that the embassy is going to try to stay much more neutral. I think if we go back slightly in the past in the issue with Bolivia, it is curious, but some leftists are no longer that friendly to China and Russia, and there were some that were really kind of hoping that even publicly, like saying that Russia or China should intervene and stop the coup in Bolivia. And Luis Arce, for example, is seen as someone who, despite obviously being from the same party of Morales and of the Mas, and some even argue that he could go to the left of Morales. So that is something that is going to be complicated for different reasons. It seems that he is going to be less, has had less animosity toward the United States. Now, the issue with Castillo is quite curious because while he is a Catholic, his family comes from the Presbyterian. So generally people coming from Protestantism are less kind of critical to the U.S. I think Correa is an example of that. I think that many in the party were kind of had much more animosity toward the U.S. Even the president of the party, which is very controversial, Vladimir Cerrón. But the U.S. has kind of acted very neutral. Peru has one of the largest lithium reserves. So, picking sides, I think the issue with, and I mentioned that to Cyril Varn when he interviewed me is that when there was elections in last year in Peru, the 10 congressional candidates were polling higher were invited to the U.S. embassy, and among the 10 people invited were polling higher was someone who called Enrique Fernandez Chacon, who is a Trotskyist literally, and he declined the invitation, and actually that maybe helped him to have a very high amount of votes, because he made a statement in which he said that he wasn't going to go to a country that is deporting to the embassy of the country that is deporting Latin Americans. So in some ways, I also mentioned that to Cyril Varn, like the U.S. also plays the game that people say Russia or China played, which is trying to speak with different actors. The issue with China is very particular. There have been some independent analysis in the past that has shown that China has been more friendly to the right than to the left, and probably because in the Congress it was much more larger, actually. But it has to do also with the element that the Peru, Gamarra, which is the center of Peruvian clothing manufacture, is very critic of China, in particular their dumping practice. So they can sell very cheap clothes, and that affects them. And Gamarra is a kind of commercial center. Everyone at least knows someone working there. So it's a very one of the main motors of the economy in La Victoria, which is a very working class neighborhood, but it has a very high commercial activity. So with that sense, the left has been much more skeptic of China for that reasons. They didn't like even the trade agreements. So also maybe the U.S. is trying to develop another strategy.
So I wanted to pick up on that actually, a couple of points. One is that China isn't just dumping its manufactured goods, especially textiles, into Peru, but Peru is also a major exporter of raw resources for the Chinese economy, mineral ores, petroleum, all kinds of mining supplies, and some agricultural goods as well. So there's a Chinese economic interest to maintain extractive industries and cheap labor in Peru, so that you can feed Chinese industry the most economically as possible. So the ideological affinity runs counter to the realpolitik. And you mentioned the coup in Bolivia, which was at the beginning spectacular in how brazen it was, and how clearly the American official position was supporting the coup. And then it all, from an American perspective, falls apart. Mas is able to win the subsequent elections, and all of that effort and energy that was expended is gone. It ultimately proved to be a medium-term failure. They didn't even get much done during the period of time when they did have friend in power in Bolivia. Do you think that demonstration, that might have a demonstration effect that's keeping the United States from trying to pursue more aggressive policy in Peru or other places? Better to play nice and try to deal with a new leftist president. And sometimes people get elected on a far left platform, and then they can be flipped to conservative austerity policies. It's happened in Peru before. So that maybe one reason why a coup seems unlikely is because of the recent experience in Bolivia.
Yeah, about Bolivia, I think I could put even a quote that could maybe play in the Peruvian context. Pablo Solón was the former politician of the MAS that then became critical of Evo Morales and the MAS. Did say in an academic event a while ago that what he sees in Bolivia is kind of the playing of the Aymara kind of counterfeiting, like kind of this clandestine market running like Aymara, and the kind of the white cruceños, the white people in Santa Cruz who were kind of in the agriculture farming sector, and if he will have to bet, he will bet on the Aymara, and because they're constructing a discourse that has an hegemony, and I think the Peruvian white elite has also lost that ground, and I think that it is like quite I don't think that there is a way that the US is going to be able to do the same now, for different reasons, because the context, I think, is very different. So Vladimiro Montesinos, like the advisor of Fujimori, now is in jail. Actually, like it was leaked, his conversation. I think that has affected a lot of the credibility of the coup claims, since Vladimiro Montesinos is obviously not a defender of democracy in any sense. But he did mention, that he was calling on supporters of allies of Keiko Fujimori to contact the CIA, and it seems that they were reluctant to do it because they kind of felt that this time they weren't going to take their side. I do think in some ways, I think the left-wing governments could end up being quite friendly toward the U.S. in a very different way. I think this is not the first thing wave was kind of much more anti-US for different reasons. Also, it happened in the context of George Bush, so it was a different context. I think this pink wave could end up being fairly different in a foreign relations spectrum. Also, something that it was very that I think is going to be very interesting is, as you mentioned, with the issue of kind of Castillo. The Monday, the currency that had the higher growth was the sol, so which is the national currency in Peru, because Castillo had announced in the weekend that Julio Velarde, who is the chief of the central bank in Peru, he asked him to stay. So I think that in some ways Castillo wasn't as radical as some people might have believed. I think he said a lot of things, so I think that people should be very careful. Also, something that we haven't discussed is that
wait a minute. I gotta hold that because we're over our hour, and I have to get into our patron only room before it closes. On this, are you going to be able to stay with us for a little while longer, Camilo?
Sure. Yeah.
So hold that thought. I'm not saying you can't finish it. I'm just saying
save it for the premium patrons.
Premium. That's premium content, man. A wise pimp once told me that the game was to be sold, not to be told.
Was that Gene? That sounds like Gene.
That was Fillmore Slim. Fillmore Slim is a blues musician as well, and used to come in the studio quite a bit. No bullshit. Pascal.
Yes, sir.
Are you ready? I know. See, you know what's fucked up? Camilo, Pascal has a litany of questions that he didn't get to ask you. So he's sitting there like, I need to get into the bonus half to ask this motherfucker.
No. I'm enjoying the conversation. I think that Camilo is demonstrating the profound knowledge and expertise of his country that I think
you
that
don't need questions.
Yeah, we don't. You know, I'm actually thinking I should get a legal pad to take notes.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna bring Camilo on and move the fuck out the way. Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So we're going on to the if you are a patron, we're going to the bonus patron half of the show. The link is already up on Patreon. Also, before we go, we do have some new merchandise up on the This Is Revolution webpage. So if you go to thisisrevolutionpodcast.com, there is some new merchandise that we just put up for summer. And I had to get that out there. All right. And we will see you guys in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And we are out.